Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Bridging the Gap, Unmasking the Hidden Costs in DIB Cybersecurity Compliance with 800-171 and CMMC. This is going to be a process of collaboratively refining the path to robust cybersecurity in the defense industrial base. And it's going to be numbers-based. There's going to be a lot of numbers we're talking about today. That's intended to support the DIB strategy of enforcing compliance with 800-171 and CMMC. And we're going to talk about in a few minutes why that's important to the government. So I'm Mitch Tannenbaum. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Hutchins Holding family of companies. And we've been around for a while. We've been involved with the cyber AV since the very beginning. We are a certified veteran-owned GSA multiple award schedule contract holder. And you could look at our capabilities at that particular website at the bottom of the slide. We're not trying to replace your own due diligence. So, we're giving you education, and, you should be asking questions and thinking about what the implications of that are to you, and not take anything we say at face value. So, with that, we're going to move forward. So what's the purpose? Well, the purpose obviously is to help you understand the true costs and requirements of CMMC compliance, and the DoD has done a good job in this notice of proposed rulemaking that they released in helping with that, but we think there's some shortcomings in that. And then, you're going to have to decide whether you want to keep DoD and federal contractor clients, or if you are a contractor, stay in the business, and that's whether you're a contractor or a subcontractor. And then also, if you are an external service provider to one of those companies, you have to decide whether you want to stay in that business. So all of that we'll be talking about. But there's a huge opportunity there because there's going to be a lot of folks who are going to say, gee, this is too hard, this is too complicated, I don't know how to do it. And as a result, they're just going to kind of get out of the business. So who does this apply to? We're talking about CMMC. There's 3 levels now. There used to be 5. There's now 3. They call them foundational, advanced, and expert. Everybody who does business with the DoD as a prime, as a subcontractor, as a vendor, however that works, will have to be level 1 compliant. That's just the nature of it. That's the controls that are outlined in CMMC level 1 or FAR 52.204-21. That requires annual assessments and affirmations. It's kind of like in Dodd-Frank, where, an executive of the company has to say, yes, I attest that we're really doing this stuff. And if you don't, they have the option to come after you. Level 2 is for companies that handle controlled unclassified information with low to moderate impact level. That's the vast majority of the defense industrial base. And we have some numbers here that I'll show you in a minute. Those folks have to implement 110 security controls that are the 110 controls inside of NIST 800-171. They have to do a combination of annual self-assessments and attestations, and then they have to do a triannual, most likely third-party assessment, which is going to cost you $1. And then level 3 is for companies handling CUI with high impact levels. That's a small percentage of the defense industrial base. It's often folks involved with the intelligence community. You have to get to level 2. You have to be certified at level 2. And then there's an additional set of controls that the government adds to that. So this is how we're going to kind of break out today's talk about the problem, cost estimates, whether they're realistic, some suggestions, repercussions, what happens if we don't do this, your compliance costs, and a few other wrap-up sections. So let's talk about the problem. The DoD has been working on this thing for years. Controlled unclassified information, the definition of that came out in 2011 under the Obama administration. So they've been messing with this for a while. 800-171 has been around since in its early incarnations, 2013. CMMC has been around at least since 2019 in the current form. So it's been around for a while. But change happens slowly, especially in the government space. Change happens very slowly, and they're working. This is going to be a huge disruptive change. What's forcing the issue is massive intellectual property losses that the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and others are stealing from us. And DoD is going to act as the tip of the spear to go off and make these changes happen. Their compliance process is very rigorous. It's going to get even more rigorous. A large percentage of federal contractors work for the DoD in addition to civilian agencies. And many of them are likely in violation of their contract because the contract, if it includes the DFAR 7012 clause, says you're in full compliance with 80171, and there are very few companies that do that. Now, can the DoD actually make this happen? Well, we shall see is the answer. But the DoD has limited resources. They, believe it or not, they have tasked DCSA, the Defense Security Agency, to go off and help folks who have access and control of classified information. But they're mostly working with folks that have classified information and also CUI. So it's just there's a resource challenge there. The DIB assessments, the Defense Industrial Base assessments, they've transferred that responsibility to the Cyber AB, and the C3POs, the folks that are doing the actual assessments. Those are going to get approved by, trained by, certified by the Cyber AB, and they're going to work for private companies. They transfer those results to the DoD for final certification, and contracting officers will be required to verify that a contractor is certified if the contract requires certification, and that's where the rubber meets the road. Now, they're at an absolute bare minimum, right? If there's a contract clause in there that says you certify that you are, certified at this level, and you're not, then you're committing fraud. So bear that in mind. Does the DoD and the federal government really have the muscle? Yeah, you betcha. They absolutely do have the muscle. The federal government budget in 2023 was about a quarter of the entire U.S. Gross domestic product. That's a pretty big number. It's a huge customer. DoD is about 15% of the federal budget. There are, if you look at the number of businesses in the United States, it's 30 million registered business. About 6 million of those have at least one employee. And if we go look at how much money the DoD has spent, right, for fiscal years 2019, 2020, and so on, the DoD has awarded an average of 1.3 million contracts and orders that contain this DFARS clause that we're talking about, the one that requires you to be CMMC certified or compliant, depending on what level you're at, to 31,000 businesses. And that includes half of those, 50%, are made to small businesses. So that's a real challenge because small businesses don't have the resources for this very labor-intensive, very complex, and relatively expensive environment. So that's what we got going on there. But they're going to leverage off the government's market size, and they're going to make this a national security issue, which it is. I mean, that's not any stretch. And they're going to use the enforcement powers of the Department of Justice, which they have already done, and we've seen that in multiple cases, where they've gone after companies that, in particular companies that had breaches and clearly did not have their security act together. The strategy includes leading the process, focusing on prime contractor enforcement, and as we've seen in the notice of proposed rulemaking, the government is making it very clear that the primes are responsible for their subs. That means the subs are responsible for their subs as well. There's both civil and criminal enforcement possibilities there. New contracts will maybe more tightly controlled than existing contracts, and the DOJ has got money because they're finding people hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases to go off and get a get out of jail free card of okay, we weren't compliant, we broke the law, and now we're going to pay a fine. So the government has these large muscles, and they're going to use them. And if you think they're not going to use them, I think you're fooling yourself. So the next step will be to go look at the cost. Okay, the cost. So this is based on the 2023 CMMC 2.0 Impact and Cost Analysis Assessment Certification and Implementation. Wow, that's a mouth. So you can just Google that and you can find the source document. We're not making up these numbers ourselves. So the DOD said in the notice of proposed rulemaking that they think the annualized cost for the public, which means everybody but the government, is a little bit over $4 billion. And the cost to the government itself is about $9 million to kind of manage the program. And I think the reason why that number is so low is that most of the costs are buried in other parts of the DoD budget. And the only thing they're really including here is the management costs of running the program. But our focus today is going to be on cost to you. So we got small business entities, and then we got other than small business. They're using the Small Business Administration's definition of a small business, which typically means, and it depends on the industry, somewhere between 500 and 750 employees or less is considered a small business, which is why there's so many small businesses. And the areas they're going to address are going to be risk assessments, reporting, POAM, that's your project plan to get compliant, external service providers, non-recurring costs, and recurring costs. So the DoD numbers, and we'll see this number in a minute, of 221,000 primes and subcontractors, that's all we're talking about. That's all they're talking about. They're not talking about any growth in the base. And the DoD is assuming, and they've said this many, many times, that existing contractors, they're assuming that existing contractors, small and large, doesn't make any difference, are already compliant fully with 800-171, because since 2017, these contractors have been signing contracts that say, with the 7-12 DFARS, that they attest that they are fully compliant. So they're not including any costs at all to get compliant. All they're talking about is the cost to get yourself certified. It also does not include any ongoing recurring costs that existing contractors have, because DoD says that those costs should have been factored into the contracts since 2017. So, if contractors, which they have done in many cases, have decided not to include those costs in their overhead rate or in their bids because they thought they would be non-competitive, now they get to eat those costs because there's no way to factor them back in. So the exact language says, in estimating the public costs, that's the cost to you and me, DoD considered applicable non-recurring engineering costs, recurring engineering costs, assessment costs, and affirmation costs for each CMMC level. For CMMC levels 1 and 2, and also for 3, the cost estimates are based only on the assessment, certification, and affirmation activities that a defense contractor, subcontractor, or other ecosystem member must take to allow DoD to verify implementation of the relevant underlying security requirements. So what they're saying there in English is, we're assuming that you're fully compliant with all requirements of 800-171, and therefore the DFARS, 7012 DFARS, and that the only cost we're considering here is what it costs you to actually run the certification process. And again, they said, we're not factoring in those costs that I just talked about because they should have already been incurred and factored into contract prices. If you haven't, shame on you. And we know that a lot of companies haven't, but nonetheless, that's what they're saying. So that those non-recurring costs, upfront costs to get compliant, are not included in these numbers. So more numbers, lots of numbers here. So these are the DoD's estimates of the number of initial assessment. Remember, if you're doing a level 1, then you have to do an attestation every year. If you're doing level 2 or level 3, you have to do that every 3 years, but you also have to attest every year that you're still compliant. So you really should be doing some form of assessment every year, but they're only talking about initial assessments here. I'm not going to read all these numbers, please. 163,000 small businesses, 57,000 other than small businesses. That's what they're saying, for a total of 220,000, 221,000. So that's kind of the number that they're saying is the number. Now, we kind of have some other views of the years. Now, they broke this up by year because they say they're ramping it up, which makes a lot of sense. And you can see that, the number of level 1 assessments is the biggest number, and that there's a very small percentage, like maybe 5% of level 2 folks who are going to be able to do their own self-assessment and just sign off. So the vast majority of folks that have controlled unclassified information are going to need a third-party assessment. And as I said before, third-party assessments are expensive, and getting ready for them is not easy. Level 1 assessments, which you can do yourself, It's a fully honor system. You need to do that annually. Level 2 and 3 must be repeated every 3 years, but executive management has to sign off every year. And executive management would be wise, can't force you to do this, but executive management would be wise to go do an internal self-assessment every year before they sign on that form that says, yes, we are compliant and we're meeting all the requirements, because they're going to come after the executives if they don't. We've already seen the Department of Justice going after SolarWinds and other companies where the executives lied about stuff. So let's look at the cost, the DoD's estimated cost. Okay, so this is the cost broken down. These are for small entities, and they're saying, and it's broken down, you can see by level 1, the 2 types of level 2 and level 3. They're saying, for example, for a level 1, which is the simplest assessment, it's going to cost you about $1,800 a year to plan for it, and for the level 2 self-assessment, $14,000 every 3 years, and for the level 2 certification, and so on. Then it's going to cost you money to conduct the assessment. And you notice there's kind of a big elephant in the room here, which says that a level 2 certification, their estimate is going to cost about $75,000 every 3 years. So that's a big number, and you ought to budget for it. Then you got to report the results. That's going to take a little time. You got to sign the affirmations, and you're going to sign the affirmations every year, even though you got a 3-year periodicity for level 2 and level 3. And then you can see the numbers. They're saying, for level 1, about $6,000, level 2 self-assessment, about $40,000, level 2 certification, about $100,000, and then level 3 is additional above level 2. So that's an adder. But again, as I said, it's a very small number of folks that are going to be level 3. Other than small businesses, curiously, the self-assessment number was lower. Don't know why that is, but the numbers are pretty similar, which, to us, we kind of question that. But, they spent a lot of work, a lot of effort putting these numbers together. They talked to a lot of people. So I'm guessing they kind of figured this out. All right. So let's break out the labor hours. This is for level 1. And I'm not going to go off in every detail here. So, there's no non-recurring or recurring costs, because they're assuming that you are fully compliant. And any ongoing costs, recurring costs that you have, they're assuming that's already baked into your overhead rate. So they're saying, 4 hours of staff time for planning plus 4 hours from your external folks that are involved in all this, like your managed service provider, your managed security service provider, folks like that. Total of 8 hours. Conducting the self-assessment, a total of about 12 hours split between internal and external. Reporting it, pretty straightforward, 2 hours each. And affirmations, about 4 hours. And they have, in the DoD's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, they have labor rates, and it's different labor rates for different categories of people. So all that, they went to a lot of work to try to figure this out. For the level 2 triennial self-assessment, this is, as I said, about 5%. This is how that broke down. Planning about 36 hours, conducting the self-assessment about 60 hours, reporting the results into SPRS about 12 hours, which seemed a bit high, and then affirmations another 4 hours. So that's kind of what that looks like. And then the self-assessment costs for other than small businesses, that's the folks who are bigger than, say, 500 to 750 employees. Here's the numbers you got for that. So these are the DoD numbers. We think they're kind of low, but they did a lot of work. So we're going to take that at face value at this point. But it is worth noting, and important to note, actually, that DoD contractors cannot apply for, they can apply, they'll get rejected, cannot apply for CMMC certification until they convince the assessor that they're likely to pass. That means you got to go through the scoping exercise. You got to give them the documents that you have supporting it. They're going to go look at your external service providers, make sure they've achieved compliance. And it's challenging. So if you wanted to today, you could not get on the list to be certified, because C3PAO is going to say the odds of you being certified pretty low, because we don't have this, and your providers and your software tools and all that other stuff, right? they're going to say, no, we're not going to go out and put you on the queue. So that's important to understand. And the longer you wait to get ready, the longer the backlog, the longer the queue is going to be. All right. So now we're going to talk about the cost. I've already said a couple of times that, we got some questions about whether or not these costs are accurate, but we're going to kind of go through what our thoughts are. So first of all, this is not about beating up the DoD. There's plenty of people who already do that for us. We're not going to do that. This is a hard problem. They did the best job they could. They got a lot of input from a lot of people, including, I might add, the Small Business Administration, who had to sign off on the notice of proposed rulemaking before it could be released. So, this is about the hard problem. Okay, the first number on this chart is that 220,000 number that we've been talking about all along. But there's a lot of companies that the DoD doesn't have any visibility to, and they think that there's way more levels of subcontractors. So we added another 208,000, which is about 90% growth to that. So that brings the total up to about 400,000. But then the other thing which is missing here is all of the external service providers, every managed service provider that people have, every managed security service provider, third-party vendors, folks that have access to the security protection assets like SIM-SOC vendors or endpoint protection vendors, a lot of vendors. So we've upped that number to 1.3 million. You can argue maybe it's not 1.3 million, but that's our best guess, and that's the number we're kind of going to be sticking with for the moment. We took the number of folks that are registered in SAM today, 675,000, and said another 30%. And then the ESPs, the external service providers, you said 2 external service providers for each of the 400,000 contractors. Again, you can argue with the details, substitute your own numbers. Maybe the number instead of being 1.3 million is 1.1 million. Maybe it's 900,000, but it's a big number no matter what you're looking at. So, we need to consider that. And as we've said before, the DoD is working on the assumption that they've said publicly many, many times that the DIB is already compliant with 800.171, all 110 controls, everybody, all 200,000. And they also assume that the cost of compliance has already been figured into contracts. Neither of those do we believe is true. If 100% of the 221,000 had submitted their scores to SPRS, which we don't think that's the case. Now, the DoD doesn't release either what those scores are or how many folks have done it, but I have heard numbers which says that it's actually a relatively small percentage of defense contractors that have submitted their scores into SPRS. ExoStar in 2022 estimated that only 30% of the DIB had submitted scores. So, but we don't know. So, maybe it's 40%, maybe it's half, but it ain't 100%, that's for sure. And certainly a large percentage of those guys do not have a score of 110. That is for sure not the case. Our opinion is that 95% of the DIB is not compliant. By compliant, I mean have the score of 110. And the DIB investment required to achieve compliance has not been made, meaning they haven't spent the money, and it is not baked into their cost estimates. So why do we say that? Well, there's a lot of folks out there who've said that the DIB has never been 800.171 compliant, maybe been close, and that's not just us. Our experience with customers that we deal with, they have a SPRS score typically of, minus 35 to plus 70, where a perfect score, remember, that perfect meaning the definition of fully compliant is 110. And the score sizes seem to be not correlated to the size of the organization. And large organizations actually is harder because they have a bigger footprint to go deal with. Top management support, they look at this as a huge overhead cost. They're trying to avoid it for as long as they can. I understand why they're doing that, but the problem is the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. And you cannot go off and make this happen in 3 months. It's just not possible. And our view of the universe is that 99% of all businesses around the world are not properly protecting their IT infrastructure. How we know that is, you hear about a new breach, a new hack a new theft of information, new theft of intellectual property multiple times a day. If everybody had their act together, was protecting their assets, then that probably wouldn't happen. We have been able to get some of our clients up to scores of around 90 or even more than 90, but that's through a very aggressive and very active program. And many of our clients are working on improving, but the amount of resources that they have available to apply to it is limited. And the DIB-CAC has reported, I've seen charts from the DIB-CAC that shows that the scores reported in SPURS, at least at that time, was actually going down. And DIB-CAC says that's because they think that people are better understanding what it is that's required. It doesn't mean that people are getting less compliant. It means people are doing a better job of estimating what's required to become compliant. So, are they, we're asking whether the recurring costs are realistic, are, implementation upgrade costs. What happens when you have a tool and you decide the tool is no longer going to be compliant and you have to rip it out and replace it? They included labor rates in there. Are the labor rates accurate? Do they reflect your actual labor rates? Are the task times accurate? And, project management is a challenge for everybody. The DIB contractors are no better than anyone else in terms of being able to estimate time and cost. So, there's a lot of variables in the equation. Additional costs, you got to complete the POAM, right? That's something they don't manage. External service providers, you may need to literally rip and replace tools and vendors because they're not compliant. Third-party tools I just mentioned, you got to deal with that. You probably got to replace some of them. You got to deal with, what happens when you have an external service provider. You have a contractor, you have a 1099 person, you have all those costs, is that factored in there? If you're going to go build an enclave, and a lot of folks are building an enclave, and I understand why they're building an enclave, now you're managing two IT environments, this more secure enclave environment and the rest of your world. And what about international suppliers? I was just talking the other day with one of our clients who has literally less than 24 employees, and they have 1,000 suppliers. Well, hopefully, and we talked about this with them, a lot of those suppliers are not sharing any sensitive information with. So that's a good thing. But even if they're sharing sensitive information with 250 out of those 1,000 suppliers, the big number, and it's a challenge to go, how do we deal with that? So then we got, how do we get the DIB compliant? The DoD has indicated in the notice of proposed rulemaking that they would like to have this thing all done in 2 years. I think that's pretty aggressive. I don't think that's possible, but not for 200,000 and certainly not for 1.3 million. I don't think that's possible. How are they going to go retain experienced DIB contractors? Some contractors are going to say, it's not cost effective for us to do this. We're just going to exit the DoD space and go into the commercial space. And how do you attract new contractors? Those new contractors has to be compliant. And the external service providers, the MSPs, the MSSPs, the software folks, developers, QA, all those folks that they need, how do they go off and attract them and get them into the DoD market space? How do you convince the ones that are already there that look at the complexity of what it takes to become compliant, and how do you stop them from heading from the door? That's a real challenge. So now we're going to have just a very short, blatant commercial break. Your managed service provider bid the contract to you on the paradigm of, I think I know what it's going to cost for me to provide the services that are in the contract. CMMC compliance is not in that contract. And, in our conversations with MSPs, almost universally, with the exception of a few, they don't even know what CMMC is. They don't know what 80171 is. They don't understand that it's going to have a huge impact on their own business model. If you think they're ready to go support you, you need to have that conversation. We'll be happy to have that conversation with you and them. But that is a heavy lift for those folks. So do not assume that your MSP is going to be able to go off and just do that for you. And so now we're going to talk about our suggestions. And we're really, as we've said many times, not trying to beat up anybody, because this is definitely a hard problem. But we do have some suggestions on what to do. So somehow I think we have to get over all the past sins that have occurred for whatever reason, and whether that means a one-time warning if you're not compliant with a defined time to fix, some sort of waiver, or, some money. You got to figure it out. It would be helpful for us and everybody involved, including Congress, to understand what the Spurs statistics are. We don't need to know that Joe's score is 30 and Susie's score is 45 and Sam's score is -10. But we do need to know in the aggregate what's going on. What percentage of the DIB is actually posted scores, what the scores are, what the trends are. We really need to do that. We need to go off and reanalyze the cost estimates they come up with. They're going to do that anyway because that's part of the notice of proposed rulemaking. And they got to go back and look at both the public costs and the government costs. And it is a national security priority. Probably realistically, they need to go back and revisit their very, very aggressive timeline to get everybody compliant. I just don't think that's possible. And they need to figure out how that's going to get funded. There's a lot of money. If we're saying an annual cost of $4 billion a year, that's not going to come out of DIB profit. They're not going to do that. So, and I think the DoD should expect some sticker shock on new contracts, and maybe they're already planning on that. I don't know. But, there's folks who are smart who are going to go off and say, whoa, wait a minute. Let's go start repricing contracts now. I know that we've made a bunch of mistakes in the past, but let's go reprice the contracts now going forwards. And I think DoD is going to see some sticker shock. The Cyber AB, which is the organization they've chartered to go off and help them down this journey, they need to actually increase the role of the Cyber AB. The advantage of the Cyber AB is thousands of members, all of whom are business people who will look at an opportunity and say, gee, I can help here, I can make some money. And I think if they increase the charter of the Cyber AB, that would be a good thing. And next is funding. The DoD has really not funded any of these efforts. It's more been, there's very few carrots in this process and a lot of sticks. So, I think they're just not going to get where they want to be. And I do think that some percentage of defense contractors for whom defense is a part of their business are just going to say, it's not worth it. And maybe that's okay. It just depends on what it is. If you have a contractor who is very skilled in a very particular niche, and they say, we're not going to play, we don't care, then now what do you do as the Defense Department? Because now you're in a position where you're dependent on these contractors, and they're just saying, I don't care. You can't make me there, boo-boo. And if you do make them using the Defense Production Act, they're going to say, okay, we'll do that, but we're not going to be compliant. You can force us to go off and sell you this stuff, and we'll be happy to do that, actually, because we make money doing that. But you can't force us to absorb compliance costs that we didn't agree to. And some more ideas. How do you go off and, as I said, reimburse folks? Clearly more clarity. And every iteration of these documents, it generates more and more clarity, but there's still an awful lot of vagaries in here. They got to increase the clarity. Enhance the training to the degree that the government can put out stuff and say, okay, here is the standard. You don't need to figure out how to do this. You just need to follow this guidance. That would be very helpful. If they can streamline the assessment process and therefore make it less brain damaging and make it less expensive, that absolutely would be positive. And I think we do have a fair amount of communication, collaboration, and partnerships, but I think there's an opportunity for even more, a lot more of that as people go down this road. Innovation, don't go off and just keep doing the same thing over and over again, thinking it was good enough 10 years ago, so now it'll be good enough for the next 10 years. I would say for the most part, almost nothing that we're doing now from a cybersecurity standpoint is going to be effective for the next 10 years. So we've got to go back and revisit that and say, okay, let's think about this. Let's think, how do we think outside the box? How do we do things that are new and different and more effective? And, continuous improvement. That's the name of the game. It is big on continuous improvement. This is certainly an area that for which a continuous improvement would be a great thing. Next section is going to be repercussions. What happens if we don't get this right? So, if the ship does not change its course, to use a nautical analogy, and and address the root causes of why the DIB is not currently compliant. One of the things that's going to happen is they're going to have less contractors who want to play in the DoD sandbox. It's been very lucrative for folks that have contracts, but if they don't have enough people who are compliant, then they won't be able to let certain contracts, because the primes are going to say, we're dependent on these particular subs, and we can't find subs that are certified or certifiable in the right time frame, so we're just not going to bid on the contract, or you're going to have to give us a waiver from the CMMC requirements that we'll use non-qualified providers, which of course is not the direction they want to go. That would leave potentially the primes could go off and spin up, and I'm talking about the really big primes, the top 5 primes, let's say. They'll spin up new capabilities that they didn't have before, which will take time, which will cost money, which will be more expensive for the DoD, and you wind up with less competition, less people you may literally only have one company that bids on a contract. What do you do at that point? Do you sole source the contract because you only have one bidder? Do you not bid? Do you not let the contract? And then you don't have the capabilities? That's kind of problematic if you think about it. So, potentially, obviously if we don't clean up our Cybersecurity Act, we have the potential for more cyber attacks, more data breaches. We know we're seeing, defense contractors, airframe contractors, Navy contractors are getting breached left and right. Potential disruption to critical infrastructure. We haven't seen a lot of disruption to defense critical infrastructure yet. We have obviously seen other critical infrastructure disruption, but I think that's just a matter of time. Obviously, there's going to be reputational damage, financial and operational disruptions. Obviously, there's an impact to national security in terms of what happens if we don't get this all done. Potentially, there's going to be innovation stagnation. If you don't have a very competitive, active, aggressive vendor base, then the existing vendors will say, well, I have this capability. Do you want it? No, I haven't invented something new because, well, why should I do that? There's no competition. You're going to have talent acquisition challenges because these people are going to move to other industries where they're more appreciated, which will have a negative impact on morale and a loss of international standing and partnerships. So all of that are some of the potential repercussions of what happens if we don't get this right. So, let's talk about next. We'll talk about compliance costs and timelines. And it's okay. So what are your compliance costs? I'm going to be like every other consultant. I'm going to say it depends. And in fairness, it really does depend. Are you a small entity? Are you a not so small entity? How complex is your IT environment? How much CUI do you have? How intertwined is the CUI into your business model? Is an enclave even a good business model for you? Can you even make an enclave work for you? How many third-party tools does you use? I'm talking about not only IT tools, like maybe your antivirus software, but engineering tools like your mechanical design software if you're in the manufacturing business, your ERP software, your accounting software, all those pieces of software. Do you need to migrate from one environment to another? Do you need to swap out tools? What's the training exercise in that? How much does it cost you to move the data from the old environment to all that stuff factors in, but one thing you got to do is you got to document every nickel of whatever is costing you so that as you negotiate overhead rates and contract prices, you can come back and say, well, here's what we're spending, and that's why this is what we're charging you. How long does it take? Again, that depends. How much management support do you have? What is your company size and complexity? What is your current security process? Do you have robust security processes already, or do you need to kind of start from the ground up? Resources that are available, internal resources, external resources. This is a pretty resource-intense process. If you don't have resources, it's going to take you a long time. And what your current compliance level is. So with all those caveats said, here's some numbers. Rough estimates. Your mileage may vary. Don't take this as gospel. Small companies, typically they have a lower security maturity, but they have a less complex environment. So those two sort of offset each other a little bit. 3 to 6 months is probably a guess. Medium-sized companies with some security maturity, more complexity, 6 to 12 months. And large companies, even though they have more security maturity, their environment is much more complex, 12, 18 months, maybe more. It really depends on how much management support you have, what the priority is for doing it, how much money they're giving you to make it happen. All those are things that that affect those numbers, and your numbers could be shorter or longer depending on your specific circumstances. So can't tell you for sure. So let's just talk about, so why is this a good thing for you? Why are we saying this is a prize? Look at those numbers, whether it's 220,000 or 1,000,003. Those are the numbers that we think we're dealing with. You can adjust them however you want to adjust them. But, when the government moves like this, wherever you fit in that food chain, there's going to be opportunities, because there's going to be people who drop out of the food chain, whether they are primes, whether they're subs, whether they're third-party providers, vendors, whatever they are. Opportunities multiply as they are seized. You're going to have to seize those opportunities. They're not just going to kind of come to you, but there's going to be huge opportunities because the market is shifting. The existing known players, they're going to need help. And if you're in the right place at the right time, you have your act together, you've done your homework, then you have the potential for being in the right place at the right time and getting opportunities that you can seize on. So we'll talk about us here for a minute, not very long, short commercial. Last section, why use us? Hutchins Holding and its family of companies. We're a certified veteran-owned GSA mass contract holder. We've been working with the Cyber AB since the beginning. I've been in the defense industrial base for about 40 years. We're motivated. We have lots of experience. We have a great team. And 80171 CMMC is one of our core focuses. So, check out our capability statement. Actually, that's the wrong URL. It's HutchInsHoldingLLC.com. Sorry about that. So, that's kind of where we're at. And, if you're in a place where that makes sense, you can partner with us. There's a lot of different ways you can partner. You can become an affiliate or commissions. You can join the CISO program. You can join our expert witness team. So that's kind of where we're at. If you think that we're a good fit and we can help you, and there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. We can, lead a project for you. We can provide advice. We can just, answer questions, whatever it is you want us to do. Please reach out to one of us, and we'll be happy to assist you. Until next time, this is going to be a journey, and we're all riding on this journey together. So hang on tight. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for watching. For more information or to purchase this or any other of our board or executive services, visit us at cybersecurity.com. Call us at 303-887-5864 or email us at rh@cybersecurity.com. Goodbye.